Dan, hello. So you and I, we know each other, but for the listener, just give me a brief description of what you get up to in the daytime before we get on to your event.
I'm a consultant respiratory physician at Norfolk Park Hospital. I'm full-time still. Um, I do some private practice in the evenings and weekends. And thanks to you, Tom, I'm about to go part-time in the NHS in 2 weeks' time, which I'm very much looking forward to. And you've enabled that, so thank you.
Excellent, very welcome. So before we discuss what you've done, just frame. And I cringe when I sort of not that it happens very often, but if you're a sort of, I don't know, listening to a podcast about an event and it refers to you as an athlete, I always sort of, I don't see myself, and even when I play professional rugby, never saw myself as an athlete, and I really wasn't an athlete then in any sense of the context. But in terms of being an athlete, how would you sort of frame sort of what your background looks like within the realms of what how can anybody possibly be an athlete with your sort of working and life and family balance? But just to give somebody context, so what does a year look like for you in terms of what you would normally get up to?
Yeah, Tom, I would never in a million years describe myself as an athlete. I'm a 60-year-old man. I find it difficult to get out of bed in the morning. So, I mean, I don't think anyone would apply the word athlete to me. Um, I mean, when I was young, I did a lot of rowing and,
Yeah.
um, gym, tennis, squash, golf, a lot of sport. But I became a typical mammal about 13 years ago. I gave up golf and I took up cycling
Yep.
wholeheartedly. So I guess my only sport in the last 13 years has been cycling.
Yep. And how do you approach that? Do you approach it with a sort of scientific mind? Do you know, have you looked at your sort of body's uptake of energy, glucose? Do you know what your sort of waking, resting heart rate is? To sort of, because that seems to me, looking at the cyclist, and it seems to be why a lot of people with maybe a science or a technology or a sort of an analytical background find themselves in cycling, because there's a lot of data available. There's a lot of feedback in terms of the power output and what the individual can produce. So how much of what you do you study and take notice of?
Yeah, it's a good question, Tom. Certainly, when I started in the late 2000s, 2008, being a doctor, I was very data driven. I wanted to know my FTP, my maximum pulse, how I responded to exercise. I got a coach. I had formal testing. I had a lot of data about myself, and then I had a training program built around that data. And the trouble is, being a doctor, is that it is totally impossible to stick to any training program because of what you do, and
Yeah.
you can't stick to the program, and you start missing bits, and one gets upset about it, but then one realizes you just can't do it. You
Yes.
just have to do what you can when you can. Um, and I guess my training's always been event driven, so I always set myself targets for the year, usually
Yes.
events, and you build to those if you can. But training is a real problem as a doctor. You either have to try and do it very early in the morning, sort of 5 o'clock,
Yeah.
or you try to do it at 10 o'clock at night. And I ended up always training at 10 or 11 at night, which is totally bonkers. And
Yes.
every book says you mustn't do it.
Yeah.
But that's what you do, and you do what you have to.
Yes. Um, and I guess you fit around what you can, and so in that study, as far as in as much or little detail as you wish to go into, physiologically, when you did those studies, you would describe yourself as normal. There wasn't anything exceptional about your body's ability to recover or produce power or anything. I mean, I know this, like, you take a complete extreme like Lance Armstrong. Yes, he was a wonderful cyclist taking aside everything else, but he had a massive lung capacity. So things like that made him abnormal as well. He could put more oxygen into his bloodstream than anybody else could normally. But as far as that, there was nothing exceptional about you. You had, you had the ability to take on load and to recover like anybody else, but there wasn't anything in there that made you exceptional in any way.
No, definitely not. Maybe I was a little bit above the average in testing. When I was a lot younger, my power to weight ratio was a little bit better than my friends. It's obviously quite a lot worse now.
Long as it's still better than your friends.
No, there's never anything exceptional. I never had any pretense to be an elite athlete. I knew where I stood, but I guess all one wants to do is do the best one can do with one's own ability, to maximize one's own ability without having any pretensions to greatness.
Yeah. So the questions so far have been deliberate, really just to frame, busy doctor with a keen interest in performance and nutrition and various things, but nothing that you couldn't read up on or learn yourself, which I think then makes what you've done even the more impressive and exceptional. So tell me what you did on the 20th of August. I think the event that you took place in. Just describe what it was to begin with, and then I'll ask more around it.
Yeah, well, I took part in an event known as Brest, Paris, which is a long distance endurance cycle event. Not surprisingly, it runs approximately from Paris to Brest and back to Paris. It's 1,220 kilometers, and you have 90 hours to complete it in. It's not a race. It's an audax, which means you're expected to be self-sufficient and complete the race without any help. Some people have support at what's called the controls, which is places you stop and have to get your card stamped. But the majority of people have no support at all and do it fully independently. If you break down, you're on your own. You have to find a way to get back. And the challenge really is that the distance is great. There's a lot of cycling to be done. In my case, I think it took 57 hours of cycling. And the challenge really is that you don't get to sleep. You have, depending how fast you are, you have to minimize your stops and minimize the sleep. So you're very, very sleep deprived by the end. So
you were 3 hours under the. Now there's a 30% attrition rate. So 30% of people don't complete it for I should think a range of reasons. During the race, at any point, how much of an eye did you have on that time?
We had a very good plan before the start. My friend had calculated our expected speed, had mapped out how long we could stop at each control.
Brilliant.
I had a good idea of exactly how fast I had to go and how much time I had to stop and eat and how much time I had to sleep. So
never enough, I should think.
Well, I guess I slept a total of 7 hours in 4 days in the end.
With the emphasis being on self-sufficiency, what does that look like?
It means that towards the end, there are a lot of extremely tired people. There are people who are falling asleep on the bike in the middle of the road and crashing. There are bodies all along the course, lying in ditches, lying anywhere, all along. You'll see, right from day 2, you'll see people lying by the side of the road. And at some point, you can see whole rows of people just lying in the road. You get so tired that you can lie down anywhere and go to sleep immediately. You close your eyes, and even 20 minutes shut eye, you feel restored. It's extraordinary.
Powered up.
You just need a small power nap and off you go again.
Which is incredible, really, because what can your body do in 20 minutes, mentally or physically?
Well, it is incredible.
But for some reason, it can just shut down. Heart rate probably drops significantly. Blood pressure drops significantly, and just whatever it needs flush everything out and get various nutrients back into the cells. It does.
It is very restorative, and you'd think it wouldn't be, but any sleep is very welcome.
So when you say self-sufficiency, it's surely you're not required to take on food and drink with you. So at the checkpoints, there's a range of drinks, isotonic drinks, different foods put on for you. So are you counting down the kilometers until you know you're going to get a bag of salted nuts and whatever they put on for you?
I mean, this event is extraordinary. The controls are in small towns in Brittany, and they're all manned by volunteers. And but I'm talking hundreds of volunteers.
Yeah.
There are huge crowds cheering you all the way.
Wow.
There is food laid on at every control, which are about 80 to 100 kilometers apart, which you can buy. And in some of the controls, the local children come with you to buy the food and carry your tray for you to the table. I mean, it's so beautiful. And this is in the middle of the night, Tom, at 2 a.m.
Wow.
Little kids carrying your trays.
Yes.
It's a big thing in France. And the really beautiful thing is that the French line the roads almost 24 hours a day, cheering you on.
That's incredible.
Bon courage. And it's incredibly moving. And that's why people come back and do it again, because you don't get that feeling of humanity in any other event. It's really extraordinary. Of course, you'd never get that in Britain, unfortunately. You'd never be cheered on, but it's a really powerful event in France.
At any point, did you think about stopping and quitting? By that I mean,
okay, Tom, the only way to get through this is to start being completely determined to finish.
Yeah.
Because any normal person will stop as soon as they can. I mean, you start at 7 o'clock at night and ride through the night, which is an extra hardship of this event. So, you know,
right. So you're tired from. You haven't even got the benefit of cycling through the day. You're entering into a period of natural fatigue anyway.
Intentionally, they start you through the night.
Just to make it slightly harder.
To make it harder. So, the first control comes at 200 kilometers. Now, for a normal person, that's a very long bike ride.
Yes.
But in this is just the first control.
Yes.
Which you hit. I think we hit about 2 o'clock in the morning. And that's, a tiny proportion of the ride. So there are people quitting already. And these are self-selected people who've done the qualification.
Yeah.
200, 300,
big
400 and 600 kilometer ride.
Yeah.
These are not...
So to explain that to anybody listening, you've got to complete a series of qualifying events and times, or just the distance.
You have to complete them within the regulation time.
Okay, to each event, get it stamped, and then they will let you take part in the event, which for a range of reasons makes sense, just to not to waste their time, your time, and also for safety reasons. If you get people who are just bloody minded and are turning up, you can get yourself into a hell of a lot of trouble without being physically demonstrating that you can do it beforehand. So you've got people quitting before they've even reached what would be the regulatory ride. So they've done those rides previously, but there's just something about heading into the night that they haven't quite prepared for.
Riding at night is a different experience. Although there are riders everywhere, there are lights everywhere.
Yeah.
You're never alone on this ride. There are quite a few accidents on the road that you see, which are a bit disconcerting, nasty accidents. When you've got thousands of people riding at night, tired.
Inevitable,
yeah. Pretty horrible accidents. But going back to your question about quitting, you can't go into this event with any idea of quitting.
Yep.
You've got to be focused on reaching the goal, because as time moves on, things start to get very unpleasant in many ways.
Yes.
And, you have to have resolved that you're going to get through those problems, and everybody has problems.
Yes.
So I
And what
think
what typically, you know, in an events like, I don't know, let's say marathon, you know, people who you know, a historic knee problem flares up and they get pain there. You get a lot of runners, you get a lot of blisters that they can't solve and that gets very painful. What goes wrong then in cycling when people hit problems? What typically, you can probably divide it into, I don't know, 20% this, 20% that, but what tends to go wrong for people at the various stages?
Okay, that's a really good question. You're going to start to get pains. So people are going to start to get pains in their knees or shoulders, usually knee pain. Obviously, your bottom is going to start to hurt to various degrees. Sometimes extreme pain if you develop pressure sores or ulcers. I mean, you have to stand up. You can't sit down. I laughingly mentioned Shermer syndrome to you
You
before
did.
I rode, which has only been described in long distance cyclists. Funnily enough, it's a condition where after about 800 kilometers, the neck muscles fail and you can't hold your head up. They just
Often
fail.
reading about it this morning, often with little notice to the rider, so you don't feel it going; it just goes. The head just.
It says that from the beginning, when you begin to feel it, and it's a weird feeling, that you've got 2 hours until you get to complete failure.
Right.
And I know we were having a good laugh about it before the event. And guess what? At about 800 kilometers, I felt my neck going. And
800K.
I actually got Shermer's. So you can't hold your neck.
And that is the muscles have lost all ability to function. There's no, you know, there's no electrolyte or anything like that running through them anymore, and they're just basically no longer able to.
They begin to fail. Now, for whatever reason, it didn't completely fail, but it was about 70% fail. So I couldn't look up and I couldn't look down. And it was very, very unpleasant because you can't see where you're going. So it was very, very unpleasant feeling. But I was worried about that it was going to go into complete failure. So I went into a chemist and got a soft foam cushion, which was useless, but psychologically helped me.
Just help you.
And then I found another chemist.
Could you wear the sort of neck brace that you see paramedics fitting people on a roadside with? Would that work? And then I suppose
That's what you need. That's what you need. Ideally, you need something rock solid. It would be extremely uncomfortable. So you see people who've tied their head back with an inner tube to their saddle post. You see people with a giant Pringle pin that they've balanced on their handlebars under their chin. I mean, there are actually a lot of people who get Shermers, is what I realized. But fortunately, my head didn't go to complete failure. It went to sort of partial failure, and I hung on for the best part of a day and a half. Again, I wasn't expecting it, but I wasn't going to let it stop me.
Yes.
So I got that hilariously, and there's nothing you can do about it once it happens. It's mechanical.
Just get through.
Yeah.
And did you obviously you've got to concentrate. If you're sort of walking or running, you can just, your mind can float off, but obviously you've got to control the bike, and your brain has to take on variables like terrain and speed and various things. But when you were in that place, to some extent, were you able to sort of function on autopilot and drift away, or you've just got to sit there in the discomfort and endure it?
You have to stay very focused and concentrate. Unfortunately, there are quite a lot of people that start hallucinating.
Yeah.
There are people that fall asleep cycling. One of my friends, last time I heard that in the middle of the night, he suddenly just took everything off his bike, threw it on the floor, and said, "Right, let's go." And he'd basically become delirious.
Yes.
So he was told to just lie down and go to sleep, and he was all right when he recovered.
He woke up and he was fine.
There are a lot of people who the sleep deprivation and the tiredness you can't they can't think properly anymore. They lose the ability to think clearly. They lose focus. You have to keep focus. You have to make sure that you eat. You have to make sure that you
Yes,
drink.
even if
And
you
if
don't want
you
to.
feel tired, you have to stop and just lie down by the side of the road, or there's going to be trouble.
So you set off with a couple of people. How many people sort of in your sort of group?
Yeah, well, this is fantastic group psychology, and I was prepared for it. And we've spoken about this before about transatlantic rowing. Um, there was an expectation at the start that we would stay together and ride for each other and ride as a team. Within the first 3 hours,
Yeah, I knew you were
one
going to say this.
person rode off,
Yeah,
and he was the team road captain.
yeah,
And we only ever saw him again for about 4 hours in the ride. And he hadn't said a word before. I'd driven him down there,
yeah,
so his behavior was totally unexpected.
yes,
But I had prepared myself for such events because I know what
really,
people are like.
yes,
I've done it before,
yeah,
and I know that you have to rely only on yourself,
yes,
and you must stick to your own plan and not
yeah,
allow anyone
yes,
to
yes,
derail
yes,
you.
yeah,
Because otherwise, if people start particularly slowing you down or wasting time, you're going to fail.
yeah,
You have to be a little bit ruthless, but the team dynamic between myself and one other rider was fantastic. We managed to stick together all the way through, and that was brilliant and a great help. But you never know how other people in the team are going to behave, and I've experienced it before. You have to be ready for anything really, and try and stick to your own plan within reason.
Well, that if you look at what tends to go wrong on, say, an Atlantic row in where there's a group of individuals, a significant amount of time, more so than any other reason, not technology, not weather conditions, is the group dynamic breaks down because either unforeseen, but most of the time they wasn't discussed. So one guy is racing, one guy's doing it for spiritual reasons or whatever it may be, and it's not fully disclosed at outset what everybody wants. In addition to that, if you look at things that go wrong on something like Everest, where people are waiting for others to catch up with them when really they should have kept moving. So they've got cold waiting for people to stay with the group, but they were a better climber than others in the group. So the best thing for them to do was just to keep climbing, stay warm, and to climb at their own pace. So there are reasons to stay together, and there are reasons to run your own race. But I think you have to. You're right. First and foremost, you've got to, in an event like that, you've got to have your plan timed out, mapped out, and just try and find somebody who matches that plan. But it sounds like you performed to your plan, whereas this individual may not have. And if you fully disclosed at outset, but perhaps they just felt as on the day that they needed to move a bit quicker. But
They actually, it turned out, had a completely different plan for
well,
us.
there you go. Well, there you go.
And they hadn't really disclosed that they were going to go with their own plan. But there's a great saying, Tom, from Mike Tyson.
Yeah.
Everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face. And it is so true.
Or the British Army says, no plan survives engagement with the enemy.
Yes, that's the other one. And it is very true. So no matter how detailed your plan is, you have to expect that when you engage with the enemy, that something will change.
Yeah. And therefore why plan? But I think it's, if you've got a base to move from, that means that the adaptation of it's not, the planning allows you to adapt and identify what within the plan is going wrong, so you can fix it. If you just turned up and said, well, I'll just run on how I feel and I'll pedal at how I feel, you got no markers then as to where am I supposed to be, how am I supposed to feel. Well, I don't feel how I'm supposed to feel, but this is where I'm supposed to be. So at least then you've got frame. I think if you just turned up and just ran everything on instinct, you'd blow up after 12 hours, because you've got to stay disciplined but then adapt, because various things won't go to plan, but you've got to have that base to move off from.
you have to plan. I mean, the important thing is that you don't waste time at controls
Yeah.
eating. That it's the temptation is when you stop, that you start to feel comfortable
Yes.
and you spend too long at control. You eat for too long. You have
Yeah.
a rest for too long, and all those minutes count. They're actually critical. So
Yes,
our plan
and
was
also
very.
your body doesn't know what's happening. So your body thinks, oh, we're up. This is it now. We're done. And so the longer you stop, the
It's
faster your
true
body begins to then shut
to
down.
relax and shut
Yep.
down. So we were very, very disciplined at minimizing stops,
Yep.
never getting too comfortable. And that was really, really important. I think a lot of the failures are because people waste time in
Yes.
controls and then there's not enough time to finish.
Yep. They've run out of time. Now that you're back, and we're now what 3 weeks since you've returned, this is the biggest thing. I mean, must be the biggest thing you've ever done physically.
Well, truth be known, in 2013, I rode London, Edinburgh, London, which is actually further. It's 1550
Yeah.
kilometers. Um, it's different because it's across Britain and the terrain's a lot more varied. In fact, the terrain's a lot harder in Britain. Britain is relatively rolling and flat, whereas England and Scotland have got some quite steep hills at points. You've got a little bit more time in London, Edinburgh, London, um, but you've got to go further, and your body takes more of a hammering. But this was 10 years ago.
Yeah.
So I was a young man in those days. um, so, but I failed it last year because the plan went wrong and
Interesting.
the group turned up with a hangover and didn't cycle properly, and
Yeah.
there were loads of problems, and it completely derailed the whole thing. And then we had the heat wave, and one thing led to another. And I didn't finish. It's the first time I haven't finished an event. But as I said to you, I learned more from failure last year than
Yes.
I've ever learned from success. It's totally true that you reflect a lot more if you fail. If you succeed, you think, oh yeah, I'm fantastic. I was always
Yeah.
going to
Yeah.
succeed, which is
Yes.
not true.
Yeah.
And I realized you had to have very careful planning. And when I do London, Edinburgh, London again in a couple of years, I'm going to have a very tight plan again.
Okay. So that's so. So my final two questions were. Let's lead it that way, Ron. I mean, you have done big events like this. You have pushed your body to extremes, but I just wonder whether this event, and it sounds like it did it in some ways, but do you now look differently upon yourself, the world, family? Do you feel different post event than you did before in a reflective sense?
I think everybody who completes Paris Best Paris, and there's not that many people in the world who have, feels different about themselves. It's a life-changing experience. It's so emotional. It's so intense. The generosity and kindness of the French is almost overwhelming.
Yes.
The humanity of the event, 70 different nations, everyone there trying to do this ridiculous thing. It is ridiculous. You realize it's ridiculous right from the start. And then completing it is a huge sense of satisfaction. Your body has taken a real pounding, but it's very, very satisfying on a personal level. And you do feel different, about your achievement. But then, of course, there's a depression that a lot of people feel after it as well, which is written about quite a lot on Facebook. That when you start to come down, it's quite difficult. You reach this high, and it doesn't last. And there's a slight emptiness that you're left with. I don't know if that happens to people in general when they complete
Yeah, they talk about
big
it a lot, and
events.
the Atlantic Rose talk about it a lot. Yeah.
Um, People are slightly lost. They
Yeah.
don't really know what to do with themselves. I mean, obviously, you got to recover physically, and a lot of people have got a lot of damage, but you can recover. But I'm still going through that process. Also, I'm really relieved to have done it. I'm pleased, but but and there is an ongoing sense of elation, but I spoke to a couple of my friends, they've been dreaming about it every night since it finished. It's so
Really,
intense that it stays with you.
it stays with you.
Yeah.
And my final question is what next? And does what next help with that depression and that recovery? One of the fears that somebody once said to me about embarking on a really momentous goal was that they worried that if they did achieve it, that it would then set the benchmark even higher thereafter, and they'd never struggle to get that high. And it's something that they now work with professional footballers, professional rugby players, linked to why there's such a number of those that have gambling addictions, because they have this huge high every Saturday, and their body's looking for it midweek when there's a lot of downtime, a lot of recovery time. And so, what are your thoughts on that? And do you think it's always a good idea to think what next, or should you sometimes put these things to bed and accept that was something that you then did, and you should find something else as stimulating, but not necessarily physically?
Yeah, really good question. I mean, a lot of us who do these things, the great thing is that there are hundreds of long distance events organized in Britain every year. They go on, and most people who finish these events carry on doing these
and it's their greatest achievement in doing 200k, let's say, on a bike.
Yeah. It is a badge of honor to complete these ultra events, but then you'll see all these people at the normal events. I say normal, they're not normal by normal standards. They're sort of 200, 300, 400, 600 events, but they go on all year, and they're always there, and they're all over Britain. They're fantastic. There's London, Edinburgh, London, which we're already planning for in 2 years.
Brilliant. We the same people that you did the Paris-Brest Paris trip?
Yeah, and some of them are getting on, they're over 65. We'll see how long we can keep going for. The average age on these events for men is around 52, 53.
Okay, that's interesting.
The oldest was 80. I don't know if they finished.
Yep.
But
why do you think that they're sort of a bit older than the, say, average marathon runner?
I think cycling's less impactful. So if your knees have started to hurt from running,
so a lot of these people could have been marathon runners and have now taken up cycling later on in life, perhaps.
Maybe, or a lot of men seem to gravitate towards cycling in their 40s.
Yep.
It's just such a fantastic feeling. Every time you get on a bike, you have that wonderful sense of freedom. Yep. It's healthy. You get to see landscape, the countryside in a way you don't. It's a brilliant, life-affirming sport.
Wonderful, fantastic. Well, I shall take a keen interest in your build-up, and in a strange way, then that maybe supersedes for you mentally an event that you failed once, your achievements in France, because you'll in France you hadn't failed, and you're going back now to place, and you'll have to ride up to and past the place where you gave up. And I should think you'll maybe have lots of excuses in your mind as to why it's a bridge too far mentally. So that'll be fascinating to see how you build up to that.
This time I will definitely complete it, Tom.
I think you will. Wonderful. Dan, thank you so much for your time. That's been absolutely fascinating.
Thank you very much.